So for the last 3 weeks, we've been talking about hearing. How do we hear this God? And I realize when we say that phrase, it sounds to some like, depending on your background, depending on how you've been raised, or the amount of information you've had as far as the church goes or the Bible, that for some people, hearing God is just like having breakfast. They hear God all the time. And he speaks and tells you what color socks to wear in the morning and who to vote for and things like that. And then other people on the other end of the spectrum would say, I've never heard God speak in my entire life. I think somewhere in the middle is a God who is a loving Father who cares and who speaks to us, both in our intellect, in our spirits, in our emotions. He speaks. What father would not speak to his kids? In fact, Jesus affirmed that fact when he said, my sheep, the people who follow me, will hear my voice. The people who will follow me are going to hear my voice, referring to us using the metaphor of a sheep. Now, I realize that's not a super sexy metaphor we don't like to think of ourselves as sheep, but the idea was the humility and the meekness and the willingness to follow a shepherd's voice. And so we've talked about 3 ways. What are the 3 ways?
Yeah, he wasn't here 2 Sundays.
Yeah.
So he's like, Daniel, do it. You were here. So one was like hearing God through his word, and hearing God through his spirit, and hearing God through the people of God. So that is, and I want to remind us, if we think about, like Bruce said, the people who even hearing God for the breakfast or the socks, and then there's one thing we cannot do is to compare ourselves. Like if you are starting your process of learning to hear God, you can't compare with someone that is long. It's almost the same at the gym. If you go to the gym for the first time and you do the exercise and you look to your left and there is a person that his muscles has appeared, and you can't say, why I'm not like him? Look, I have 5 pounds on each arm. But if you do this 5, and then you add extra 5, and then you add, and then there's a time where you will be doing like the 200 pounds. But you need to start. So that 3 ideas we gave on the last 3 Sundays, it's the basics where we build our relationship with God. It is by hearing him through his word, by hearing him through his spirit speaking to us, and through the people of God. And that's why he builds up to the point where you can hear him in later one, and because it's a matter of trust. Every time you hear God and you trust him and you do it, it builds you faith for the next challenge. Now, and in YWAM, we always talk to one another saying, what was the last thing God spoke to you? Because it's going to direct you to the next thing forward. Because if you look at the last one and you didn't do it, you don't going to do the next one. Because it's going to be like a matter of every time you don't continue to do what God is saying to you, it's kind of harden our heart. Then it's like, is that God speaking or not? And doubts start to come. So that's why every time you hear God, even if it's the simple and the small thing, you obey him, it builds up for the next challenge.
There was an author, he was actually a politician. He started his career as a lawyer. He worked as special counsel to the President of the United States. That president's name was Richard Nixon, and it was the 1970s. If you were around then, if you read your history, he didn't finish very well, that president, and neither did this author. He ended up in jail for crimes that were committed under oath while he was in his office. His name was Chuck Colson. In prison, he ran into a group of people who led him to the knowledge of Jesus Christ. He converted. He spent the rest of his life creating a ministry called Prison Fellowship, in which he preached the gospel to those who were incarcerated behind bars. He wrote a book called The Body, and the central theme of the book basically was this. He said, if the church is the body the holy presence of Christ in the world, its most fundamental task is to build communities of holy character. We can just leave that up there for a second. What an interesting statement, The task of the church, if it is the body of Christ, is to build communities, pockets, if you will, people of holy character. A community is made up of people. We've talked about that a lot over the last few weeks. Without people, there is no community. A community is this group of people who have come together in a common community. And what they've centered around, our particular community, is this fact that we believe that Jesus Christ was more than a good teacher, but he was in fact the Word that became flesh and dwelt among us. Crucified, rose again on the third day, ascended unto heaven, and now sits at the right hand of the Father, waiting for the church to run her course. But he created something. Out of his side flowed blood and water. In the same way, a man and a woman walk up to this altar and stand side by side, and something new is born. A single man and a single woman meet right here in this spot where this table is. We move it out of the way for weddings. And they come to this very spot that I'm seated on this morning. And they come one thing and they leave another. It may not be evident right away, but they come as two and they leave as one. It's pretty amazing that out of a commitment before God and man, and the words that are spoken and the heart behind those words, a new thing is born called us. In that same way, on that cross that day, a Roman soldier pierced his side thinking he was just doing his job. But out of that blood and water, something new was born called us, the church of Jesus Christ. And so what Mr. Colson is saying is our job is to be a community of people of holy character. The way that happens is what Daniel was describing. Is we relate to God and we respond to God. It's not enough to hear God through his word or hear God through the Spirit or hear God even through the fellowship of believers. The change begins to happen when we respond to God. If you don't respond, like he said, you find yourself stuck or going in circles looking for an answer that really suits me. Ever do that? Remember when you were kids, you really wanted to do something and you'd ask your dad, he'd say no. Then you'd kind of just wait a little while and go ask your mom because maybe it was a softer touch. Or you just keep asking, hoping for a different answer. I'm going to keep asking someone until I get the answer that I want. Unfortunately, God doesn't exactly work like that. When he gives us an answer, it's because he wants to reveal something to us, his character, his will, and his ways to us. Those three things are really important: his character, his will, and then his ways of how he's going to pull it off for us. So you think about, God speaks to you and says, drop $100 in the offering in the morning at Church on the Hill. This guy's going to get up and talk about, things that are going to make me uncomfortable. But God has already spoken to you. Even if you had an email from God that morning, even if he put it in an email for you, there would still be this leap of faith to some degree. Let alone beyond that, I want you to go to the mission field. What? You see, when God speaks, it's always a faith thing. And so what happened is in the garden, that connection we used to have that was clear and concise and easy was broken. Adam and Eve chose another way. They chose to rebel against the word of the Lord that had been very clear. He said, look, don't eat from this tree, eat from this one, stick with me, so on. And they chose to say, no, we don't want to do that. So that connection, what I'm describing here is not natural, is my point. It's counterintuitive. You tell your unsaved friends that you put $100 in some bucket that went by you and see how they look at you. Oh, they just roll their eyes. You tell your parents that God's called you to serve for a year in Africa on the mission field or in Asia somewhere. And you're going to take a year off of university and you'll just watch people roll their eyes. Wait till get this straight. An invisible God spoke to you to tell you to go. Right? So it's counterintuitive because it's been broken since Eden.
So if the connection was broken in the Eden, Jesus modeling this connection back again. He was the modeling how to live. And in John chapter 5, this is the words of Jesus. So Jesus gave them this answer. Where are you going?
Yeah, I got to get something. Keep going. Don't worry.
I don't know. Maybe he's leaving me.
I'm not mad at you.
I thought I say something wrong. Did I say?
You're good. You're on a roll.
Okay. Wow. I'm lost now, guys.
Yeah.
I'm lost without you, Jesus. So, back here in John, so Jesus said, Jesus gave them this answer. Very truly I tell you, the Son cannot do nothing by himself. He can do only what he sees his Father doing. Because whatever the Father does, the Son also does. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all he does. Yes, and he will show him even greater works than this, so that you will be amazed. So Jesus is saying, see, this is what I want to show you, so by modeling this, you continue to do this later. I don't do anything without seeing my Father doing. I picture this like Jesus every morning waking up, spending his time with God and asking God, hey Dad, what are we going to do today? How the day is going to look like? And then God will say, go to this town, you're going to find this woman sitting on the well, you're going to talk to her about that. Or you're going to see this blind man. So it is almost like, I just remember a picture of me and my dad when we went for fishing. And he said to me, see, I don't know where we are walking, so you step on my footsteps. Because my foot, and I remember as a kid, has to jump from one step from the other one so that I don't get hurt. So Jesus is saying this, listen, this is the modeling. You walk on my Father's footsteps so that this is how the body and the head, we will work together.
Think about that. That Jesus came modeling something that was going to restore what was broken. But Jesus left. He left. He said, I'm not sticking around. I'm going back to my Father. I'll be back for you, but I'm going back to my Father. And now what you've seen me do, he said, I want you to practice. In fact, I'm not even going to leave you alone on this. He said, I'm going to send the Spirit, the helper, the advocate, the one who comes alongside, and he's going to remind you of everything I said. So I'm not leaving you as orphans. I'm not leaving you alone to figure this out intellectually. I'm going to send somebody. The head went home. The head of the body resides at the right hand of the Father. Think about this, just wrap our minds around the theology of this. The body, however, is on the earth. Has anybody here heard anybody ever criticize the church? Oh, Christians. Their voice kind of goes down a notch and their smile sneers a little bit. Christians, I'll never do business anymore with Christians. I mean, we've heard it, right? Oh, I tried church and that didn't work for me. Oh, bunch of hypocrites, right? We've heard the criticism over and over. Now, 100%. I always want to hear criticism because I think there's some truth in all of it. And we need to own 100%, even if it's only 5% correct. Well, what's with the criticism? Oftentimes, in fact, people have written books that say, oh, well, I love Jesus, but I can't stand the church. Well, unfortunately, he hasn't chosen to live that way. What they're describing is the connection. The connection, because in this third part, this connection is modeled through the body and the head. Think about what I'm saying. The connection that breathes life into us between the body and the head. You know, have you ever, anybody ever tried playing the guitar? Tried to play the guitar, right? But probably everybody in here has tried at one time. And now how many actually play the guitar? About 1 out of 10, right? So, but when you first picked up that guitar, do you remember just, someone hands you the guitar and, okay, you're going to play a C chord, so three fingers right there. And you watch them do it, and then you tell your fingers, do that. And they go like, no, I'm not going to do that. You're like, you're my finger on my left hand, do what I told you. And this finger just doesn't even move, even though you're willing it. Move, put it on that A string. And then finally you go, well, you rebellious finger, and you push that finger right there. You hold it right there. You stay there till I tell you to not to move, all right? You remember how incredibly awkward that was? Isn't it amazing that your own finger won't do what your head tells it to do? You know why? It's because your finger doesn't know the way. Your finger doesn't understand that neural pathway yet that says, play the A string 2 frets down or 3 frets down. But do you ever watch Rick Bailey play the guitar, or did you ever watch David play the drums? They're not up there going, oh. They're just like, Rick's just bebopping there, just eyes closed, just in the moment, right? You know. In the early church, Paul would address this issue because he warned the early church. He said the downward spiral is going to begin when you lose connection with the head.
So it is this church that he wrote a letter for the Colossians church. That is a church that we say, you guys, you started well, but somewhere there you lose it for your connection with God through things. Look what he said, chapter 2, verse 6 and 8. Then just as you receive Christ as your Lord, continue to live your life in him. Just get the words like in him. Rooted and built in him. In strengthening in the faith as you were taught. And overflowing with thankfulness. See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the elemental spiritual force of this world rather than on Christ. So he's like, don't, you started well. There's few letters in the Bible where they say, you guys started well, but you let other things in the way. And then he continued, he said, therefore, do not let anyone judge you but what you eat or drink, or with regard to a religious festival, a new moon celebration, or a Sabbath day. These are shadow of the things that were to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ. Do not let anyone who delights in false humility and the worship of angels disqualify you. Such a person also goes into great details about what they haven't seen. They were puffed up with idle notions by their unspiritual mind. And now he say, look, this is the key point on this verse. He say, they have lost connection with the head, from whom the whole body, supported and held together by its ligaments and sinews, grows as God calls them to grow. You see, he said the problem is not signs and wonders or anything. The problem is you lost connection with the head, and then you were letting other things. It's like, oh, you're ripped jeans. You cannot worship God in this way. Or you ate this kind of food. You cannot worship. So when we lost connection with the head, then we start to worry about things that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you stand or sit. What matters was the connection with the head. And Paul say, listen, you started well in him, but somewhere this happened because you, instead of me looking back to the head and say, what do you think? No, it's like the hand fighting each other. It's no, a head, where do you think? Where do we put the food? It's in the mouth. The head will have to say, because the other hand will not tell you well to put the food one.
You know, everybody know who Stephen Hawking is? The famous scientist, chemist, mathematician that just passed away last year, a Brit. Can you picture him? Can you picture an image of him? If you can, that image would be him in an electric wheelchair. He was a quadriplegic. He couldn't take care of himself even in the most basic of ways. He was helpless. And yet, inside of his mind was brilliance. Mathematically brilliant, scientifically brilliant. If you were to just see him as an individual, not knowing who he was in public, it would be very easy to rush to judgment. I've done that. I assume something about somebody because of what I see on the outside. He suffered from a disease called ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease, and that's a disease where there's nothing wrong with the brain. What's happened is the connections have deteriorated. And so the brain and the body are separated. The body won't respond to the brain's commands, even the most basic things. It's funny how our bodies are, we don't notice we don't pay much attention to them until they don't work, right? This amazing number of things we do in just a few moments that are all done by our brains. But when that connection is broken, we're easily misunderstood. There was an article written a few years ago of a study that was done on cerebral palsy, which is a very similar disease. It's a deterioration of the neural pathways that interrupt the information that flows and the reaction and the obedience that flows from the head to the body and creates a very difficult situation. And this article was written, and it came out of a study. I'm going to read just a piece of it to you. The television camera was merciless. It never blinked. Not when the teenage girl's tongue rolled over to one side, and not when her eyes rolled wildly. Not when she drooled and sputtered and fought off gagging on her own saliva. For this science program devoted to cerebral palsy and its study, the camera was recording every extreme manifestation of the disease. Another person with the same disease, a young man, entered the girl's room brought there by the television program's producers. He had made astonishing progress in rehabilitation, and he demonstrated his skills for the bedridden girl. He spelled out words one alphabet letter at a time with wide scraping arcs of his feet, so fast that an accompanying interpreter had trouble keeping up with him. He also typed with one toe, using a metal connection to complete a circuit on the keys. He even had learned to use a machine that amplified his clicking, guttural speech, enough to make it intelligible to a trained ear. In contrast, the girl had received no rehabilitation therapy. An Ohio State agency, unable to care for her medically, had placed her in an insane asylum. The television program pointed out the stark irony. Everything was wrong with this girl except her mind. Behind the wild expressions, the drooling, was a beautiful, intelligent mind imprisoned. Workers at the hospital had drawn a large chart divided into 80 squares of key phrases, such as I want or I need. The girl communicated by looking at a square with the appropriate phrase whenever she could force her eyes to hold steady long enough. Someone asked her if she had any questions for her progressive cerebral palsy visitor, this young man. She twitched and she shook, and her eyes darted and weaved and danced around, and a volunteer watched her eyes carefully for telltale clues of what she was trying to say. It took 5 minutes for the girl to look at 3 squares coherently and ask a question, and it was 3 words. Were you angry? Were you angry? Did you hear her? You ever get tired of being misunderstood? You ever get tired of being misaligned? You ever get tired of being made fun of? Does it ever make you angry? Can you imagine? Isn't it interesting that Jesus Christ, the Lord of the universe, has never come down and appeared on SNL Live or CNN to hold a news conference to defend himself for all the drooling that his body has done over the years and all the spastic things his body has done over the years? Can you imagine the humility of God? The God of the universe, the head of the body, the glory of the body. He just lets us represent him day in and day out. And sometimes we miss our mouths, and sometimes we open them when they should be shut. We shut them when they should be open. Sometimes we get sucked into racism. We get sucked into materialism and politics and all kinds of other nonsense. All in Jesus' name. And the owner of the name remains silent and allows us to represent him. I don't know about you folks, but that should cause us to worship the incredible humility of God. Who is this God who allows us in weakness to bear his name and to represent him on the earth? Who is this God?
So, James, he give us in his letter, he gives us some guidelines. Because if we think about what can we do if we daily respond to the voice of God and practice what he says. Imagining how much change will bring to our life and how much will change our family and even the environment around us just for the fact that we obey God. And look what James, we're going to describe this, but I just want to read this passage before we break down. And he said, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. I love the authors in the Bible when he wants, even like Jesus, he said, I very truly, I say to you this. It's like, now, in everything, pay attention more on what I'm saying. Take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all mortal filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. Do not merely listen to the word, so deceive yourself. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says, it's like someone who looks at his face in a mirror, and after looking at himself, goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks intentionally into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do.
Watch the sequence here quickly with us. Would you just think about this? We're talking about this responding thing. First he says, quick to listen. Here, guys, you want a marriage seminar in 30 seconds?
The wives, don't elbow your wife now. No husband now. Everyone put their hands this way. Okay? We don't want to see people like, yeah, here.
Chickens.
Chicken. Yeah. Let's see the pastor is talking about.
Quick to listen. He starts off. He says, the beginning of the learning of this process, he said, you've got to be quick to listen. And then he cobbles it together with, and slow to speak. Quick to listen, slow to speak. It's counterintuitive to us, especially as independent North Americans, right? We don't listen quickly. It's just hard, but listening is loving. And women, right? Listening is loving. That is your love language. Men are just men of action. We fix our mistakes later. We just rush into wherever angels and devils fear, and then later we figure out what we're trying to do. How many guys, seriously, you get something new, you actually read this is why they invented the quick reads, right, for the instructions. You get an electronic device, there's the real instructions, and then there's the 5 bullet points for people who will never read instructions. I don't have enough time or patience to read instructions. I can't. It's just, I have too many things to do. So he says, the beginning of the process is to be quick to listen, cobbled with slow to speak. Because I don't know about you, but my initial response is almost always flawed. When I'm dealing with my initial response, my initial rush to judgment is almost always flawed in some way, shape, or form. I don't have enough information.
And then he said, slow to anger. Have you ever done anything good when you're angry? If we think about how many times we have to say sorry because we act in anger. If we just do the 2 things first, quick to listen, slow to speak. I tell a story yesterday. I mentioned me and my daughter, we put on Facebook the team we want to win on the Super Bowl. And someone just wrote down like very deep Christian answer that why I should not go for the team. And by now you know which one I'm talking about. The one that floats the ball and everything. So, and then I wrote down an answer because I got upset. It was like, it's my choice. I can choose. I'm not looking for a church and a pastor, I'm looking for just a team to win. But then I read my words, and I delete everything. Because I thought about the answer will come on the other side and become an argument. And then no one is going to win except the devil. Because we're going to break relationship. We're going to hurt people. Because in the anger, I never see someone saying, in anger, I did something amazing this morning. Do you know? And then even in anger, like, hey, I can hear you have this bracelet say, what would Jesus do? And then it's like, no, it wasn't Jesus, it was James, his brother. His brother was not like him. So I'm now in James' idea. But it's true. It is never help. And he say, hey, slow down the anger.
I believe anger is always a symptom of something deeper going on in us. Anger is always, for the most part, I believe, a symptom of something that's missing that God would love to address if I would stop and James would say, look in the mirror and let the mirror tell me. He uses this metaphor. What a strange metaphor, isn't it? He said, the man who hears the word but doesn't do it. He said, he walks in deception. He's like the man. And then he pulls this metaphor out of life. He's like a man who, looks in a mirror and then he looks at it and then forgets. He just looks at it briefly and doesn't realize what he looks like. Mirrors can be a scary thing in the morning, right? You check in with the mirror, it's like, whoa, where'd that, right? But you know what's scarier than that? Not checking the mirror and going to work or going to school, right? Right? It's one thing the pain of the mirror early in the morning and you see your age or whatever, you see what's wrong, but it's even scarier to go through your day without checking in the mirror and realizing, oh, I could have caught that early on. And this is what James is saying. He said the response, this thing we're describing, this connection with the head, he says happens as you begin to check in with yourself. You begin to check in with God. You begin to check with the Spirit. And he says, listen, he says, and then the scripture would go on to say, he said, get rid of all moral filth. He says, so the beginning of this, as he said, is human anger doesn't work the righteousness that God desires. So first of all, get rid of all the what is he describing? He's describing the competition. He's describing all the things that compete with hearing and seeing clearly. It's amazing to me how many people will approach me or our pastors and they have some religious axe to grind or some religious crusade that they're on about what people should wear, what people should watch, what people should drink, what people should eat, what version of the Bible. They're on some little mini crusade. And it feels good, darn it. But if you listen long enough, you talk long enough, it's not anything about that. It's their struggle with porn, or their struggle with their spouse, or their struggle with their anger. You hear what I'm saying? You see, they want to just fiddle with the things that are on the peripheral because it just seems to scratch some religious itch that we all have and make us feel a little bit better about ourselves. But man, to look into that mirror deeply and see what God would say about the deeper things of our lives that no one else sees, that takes a measure of courage and faith and discipline. But that's where God wants to go. He says, get rid of all the moral filth that contaminates this connection, that competes for my voice.
And then he say, humble receive the word from God. And I my first 2 years in the YWAM here in Salem, I work on the ropes course. And I'm not, as you guys know, English is not my first language. So there was a word that I never used it before a lot. It was the word, I got it. Until I work on the ropes course. So you were 25 feet high on the air and people trying to cross from one tree to another and they are battling, they're like falling out of the platform, getting hurt, and you see a little bleeding. And then I'm standing here on the platform. I hook myself on the tree. I'm very safe. I even go and back just for fun. And I extend my hand to the person and say, here's my hand. Just grab it and I pull you on the platform. And the person say, I got it. I was like, in my head, I was like, no, you're not. You were falling. You were hurting yourself. Let me help you. And the person, I got it. And then I was like, okay, I stepped out and was like, let me watch the battle of the unstable person and a stubborn person. No, it is, and then he say, just humbling. Don't say to God, I got it, God, watch me. And then God say, there's the wall. That same fishing trip with my dad he say to me, we were walking, and then I step in front of him, and I keep walking. And my dad say, stop. And I keep walking. And then he say, stop. And I keep walking. And the fourth time, I hit the bush with thorns on my same height as me. And the thorns hit, like I have thorns everywhere in my arms and my legs. And I look back to him and say, don't you see the thorns? And he say, yeah, I'm telling you to stop like 4 or 5 times. But you didn't listen to me because you're not humble enough to stop when I'm saying to you. So, and then James say, be humble. Stop and hear what the word is saying. If it's to forgive, just forgive. Just be humble enough. Or if it's to give it away, just let it go. But this is the way you keep acting what God is saying.
And when my life is full of thorns, I'm in a desperate place. And then it just seems like to me the Bible comes alive to me. Do you ever just get in a truly desperate place and you finally crack it open and it speaks to you? It's like, gosh, this works so well in a situation where I'm desperate. I should try it when things are going well. But we don't. It's the craziest thing about our human nature. We call out, We just call out when we're desperate. And God in his mercy says, like his Father, says, okay, yeah, I'll help you here. Let me pick the thorns out of your soul. Let me pull the thorns out of your heart. I asked you to stop it. You were too busy. And so then he says, just simply begin to practice. He says, just do what it says. Just practice it. And this is back to the guitar or any other. You look at people who are famous, Tom Brady throwing a football, Ronaldo kicking a soccer ball, a concert pianist, whatever it is, those people didn't wake up professionals. They woke up with a gift, but they honed their gift through practice and discipline. And this is what James is saying. He said, look, of course it's clumsy. It's clumsy for everybody at first. But he said, just do it. Just begin to do it. He says, not only begin it, but just look intently into it. So that means seriously, look intently into it. Don't stop looking. Don't stop. It's not enough that we did it 3 days ago. He said you have to do it on a regular basis, and you'll be amazed what comes out of it.
And then he ends and say, you continue to do this so that you will be blessed in what you do. So it's a pattern that we create, and then we start to reap the blessing. Have you seen that you go through a storm in your life? When you come out of a storm, you have empty hands. But sometimes you go through a storm in your life and you have a life of prayer and worship and trusting God, even though in the storm. When the storm is over, your hands are full. Your relationship with people is better. Your relationship with God is better. Because even though through the storm, you are still sowing seeds that you reap on the end.
You know how this works? And we're done. Jesus would tell all kinds of stories trying to get people to understand the connection between what he was saying is truth and where they lived. If you read the parables of Jesus, it's a wonderful study. Just get a book on just the parables. Parable is a created story to illustrate a real truth. It may or may not have actually happened, but Jesus uses this story to illustrate something that's deeply true. So there's this one time where Jesus is around a group of people who lived in difficult times, politically, relationally, racially. They lived in difficult times under the Roman Empire. And here's what he does. In the midst of this difficult time, he tells a story about birds. Here's what he says. He says, would you just stop and just consider the ravens? The word consider there means to just stop and think about it. So if Jesus said, stop and think about it, obviously he's given us the ability to do just that. He's not asking us to do something we're not capable of. So he's saying, would you stop? Like he's saying, stop and just consider it. Here's what I want you to think about. Okay, Jesus is going to download some deep theological truth in the Greek. And Jesus said, no, look at the birds. Wait, Jesus, This is not a biology trip. This is not a field trip. We want to know the deep stuff. Jesus said, I'm trying to get you to the deep stuff. Look at the birds. Okay, we're looking. Who feeds them? That's a good question. Who does feed the birds? I do. Now do the math. What's worth more, you or the birds you're looking at? I think I am. Right answer. Who takes care of the birds? You do. Who do I love more? Me. Put it together. Would you stop worrying? If you don't have it, would you stop? Would you relax? I'm going to take care of you. Would you stop and consider? He does that all around us day in and day out. He just calls us to slow down and to stop. To slow down and to stop. My wife and I were on vacation last week. We were on this beautiful beach in the southeast coast of Mexico. It was about 79 degrees. The water was crystal blue. The sun was just going down. We were sitting there in this chair, having something to eat, just looking out over this expanse of water, just this idyllic situation, just peaceful, beautiful. I have a picture of it if you want to see it. And I look over, and there are these two young girls sitting there, attractive young women, and they're sitting there on the same beach in the same chairs in the same position, and they're taking pictures of each other. They're taking selfies of each other. Now, I'm not here to, but everything in me wanted to just go over and grab that phone and throw it in the ocean. And would you stop? Would you look at what is in front of you? We're swimming upstream here on this stuff. As we go to take communion this morning, would you just pause for a second before you get up to take the elements and think about what you're doing here this morning, that this Jesus Christ, on the night he was betrayed, took these elements and gave them to his disciples and said, I confer on you a kingdom in Luke. I'm conferring on you, I'm leaving in your hands a kingdom. The King of the universe said to these 11 motley crew, I trust you. This is going to be great if you follow me. We'll take communion when everyone's picked up the elements. We'll just partake together.